gives me great pleasure to have a speaker from the town of Berlin, neighboring town. And if you don't know Barry became the town moderator in May of 1985. Some people who became moderator in 1985 decided time to leave town and leave home. But Barry is in his 41st year as town moderator. In addition to that, that's just part of his participation in being part of the town of Berlin. He's the mainstay of the Berlin Arts and Historical Society. He went to Berlin Memorial School for kindergarten. He's been part of the church life in Berlin forever, and he has such a complete knowledge of the town of Berlin, including how to properly pronounce the name and the origin of that he doesn't have to worry about anybody fact checking him. So without further ado, I will present our program tonight. Very eager. And I told him, in case he has to rule anybody out of order, we do have the gavel. That's why I needed the gavel.
I don't know how many of you may be familiar with this book, Towns of the Nashaway Plantation. The Lancaster League of Historical Societies published this in 1976. So 50 years ago now, we were working on the book. And the editorial committee that put it together included Noel Hanson, Dorothy Mayo, and Esther Whitcomb of Bolton, and Doris Roger of Hudson, and of this society, and me from Berlin. And the Hudson chapter was written by Doris Roger, Mildred Coolidge, and Robert Withington of Hudson. We had a chapter on each of the towns that came out of Old Lancaster. And on the cover is a map of the original Lancaster grants, which was a rectangle originally intended, though one corner got cut off, which I'll comment on in a minute. And then there was an additional grant in 1711. The original town was 1653. And I'll pass this around so you can look at the map. And Berlin is in the bottom right-hand corner, the southeast corner of the original town of Lancaster. And so is a bit of Hudson, which came out of the town of Bolton. So you can pass that around and look at the map. I had visions of bringing a computer and this and that and projecting it, and those visions went away because I had enough to do. Now the chapter on Berlin that's in there, I have kept and occasionally revised again, and at this point it's 9 printed pages, larger pages than those, of course, and much closer type. Most recently revised in 2024. So I've tried to keep that history up with the happenings in the last 50 years, plus occasional modifications of the earlier parts, in some cases to correct something that I've learned more about. Esther Whitcomb was the chairman of a committee that did a history of Bolton in 1938 for the 200th anniversary of the town of Bolton. And they did it in a hurry-up fashion in a year or less, with people writing about different things and so on, and they published the book. They had the offer from Allen and Bacon Publishers to publish the book, so they had to produce a book. Well, what she knew by the time she was done was that she didn't know as much as she wanted to. And she continued to collect material about the history of Bolton through that 50 years, and 50 years later, she published another volume about Bolton in which she covered a lot more subjects and in much greater detail, and corrected a few things that were in the old one. It was a great, she had the chance to do that. 50 years later, here we are with coming from that book, and I don't know that we're likely to do another one this next year, but it's kind of fun for me to look back and think about it. And you know Doris. Doris and I were the grammarians in the thing, in editing the thing, and we had all these different authors from the different towns. They wrote in very different styles, and it was quite an experience. Some of them we really had to do a lot of work on their language, but they had their history, and that's the part that they needed to produce. But we had a good time with the book. And that map that shows the way Lancaster got carved up, it gives a little bit of background. Lancaster was established in 1653. The corner, the southeast corner that's cut off, Lancaster didn't get out and measure their bounds in 1653. They only got around to that in 1659. And by 1659, Marlborough was already out there measuring their bounds before they got to be a town in 1660. So Marlborough had already cut off that corner and gotten it established, so that Lancaster ended up losing that corner for not getting out there on the land much sooner. The first town cut off from Lancaster was Harvard, a section in the northeast corner. It also included lands from Stowe and Littleton in 1732. And then in 1738, the rest of the east half of the town was cut off to become Bolton. That included most of present-day Berlin. So from 1738 to 1784, Berlin was part of Bolton. And that included the Revolution. So the records for Berlin people and so forth are all in the Bolton town records. And I might add that people should be aware that it was town meetings that were doing a lot of the talk back and forth with the committees of correspondence in Boston to share their ideas about the Revolution. And as was reminded of us at the moderator's annual meeting in Worcester this last week, town meeting was one of the things that was at stake, because people here were used to self-government in town meeting, and the British began to realize that town meeting was their enemy. And therefore they tried to suspend town meeting for a while. It didn't work out very well, but they tried, because they figured that would stop some of the opposition to them that was brewing for the Revolution. And all of that's in the record books in Bolton, and I'm sure in Marlborough as well, that would cover Hudson. At any rate, then we in Berlin in 1779 were separated as a separate parish, which was a common separation. You separate the church first, get a meeting house built, and if you get more people after that, you can get created as a community. We became the district of Berlin in 1784. The district of Berlin, as opposed to the town of Berlin, had only one difference, and that was the ability to send a representative to the legislature. Every town got a representative to the legislature in those days. And in Boston and the big towns around it, they were scared to death that all of the people out here in the hinterlands were going to all send a representative the same year and take over the legislature on. At that time, the legislators were paid by the town, or their expenses were paid by the town. And some years, the smaller towns didn't even send a representative. They decided not to send a representative this year. So the bigger communities were very concerned it could be taken over by the small towns. And that's why we became a district. We still had to join with Bolton to send our representative. In 1812, we became a town and got to send our own. And that's the only real difference. We already had had town roads and town schools and a town meeting house and so on, but we didn't have We couldn't send a representative to the legislature. Other than that, we were a community from 1784 on. Now, the name of the town is not known as to how it got to be, but I think, based on other things I've seen, that it probably was filled in Boston by the governor or somebody working for the governor. It was customary for them to pass acts for a town with all the information around about it, but without the name. And it was the prerogative of the governor to fill it in. Now, the town of Harvard particularly claims that to be the case in their story. And I have a feeling it was still the case in 1784. And, of course, we got a German name because 1784 was 1 year after the Revolution was over. They were not interested in having more English ones at that point. So we got a German name. However, there is a deed in the Worcester Registry of Deeds that was passed in the town of Berlin late in that first year that we were incorporated as Berlin, in which the name of the town is spelled Barling. And you know, an ing on the end of a word is never accented in the English language. So this was an anglicizing of the Berlin, and it would have been pronounced Balin. And definitely the second syllable was not accented. So we have always had the name pronounced with the first syllable accented since the beginning of the town. And many people expect other things to be the story because of World War I and things German names being taken out and stated in different ways and so on. But in our case, we pretty much know it was pronounced with the first syllable accented from the beginning. Now, Berlin was a small place to start with. Bolton, the major part of the town was to the north. Most of the people were to the north. They put the meeting house in the north part of the town. And then the land in the south part of town was kind of poor for farming. And the result was it wasn't settled as soon. And so we had a lot of, in time, we were settled in the 1750s and 60s. And they started petitioning Bolton for a separation in that period, but they didn't get it until 1784. Now, we grew very slowly after that, and we remained a very small town, and other things have grown up all around us. Now, we did do some industrial activity in the mid-19th century and later, after the Civil War, but it was small compared to what was going on in Feltonville or Marlborough or South Lancaster, which became Clinton in 1850. These towns were growing up much faster in the industrial growth. And now we had shoe shops in Berlin. An awful lot of them were, on the farm with a couple of guys working in a shop, especially on a rainy day or when it was cold in the winter or something. They do some shoemaking, but the idea of a big shoe shop, we had one big shoe shop in Berlin. And it was built of wood and was in the center of the town from 1868 to 1883. But it burned down and was replaced by a smaller one across the village. And it was we never had another big industry like that other than that one. Meanwhile, in Hudson, you were building one after the other after the other. Lots and lots of big shoe shops. And Marlboro was doing the same thing. And, Marlboro was making shoes and boots right up into our present lifetimes. Berlin remained a farm town. It was mostly agricultural. The people were working the farm and doing their business that way. It was it just didn't catch on the same way. We didn't have this good water power sources, for one thing, but it was also we didn't attract enough new people. In the time of the Civil War, which was when we were built up quite a lot in the shoe industry, we did have quite a few young men working in the shoe industry, and the result was we sent more than our share to the Civil War. And we had a lot of people go to a lot of soldiers go to the Civil War, and of course, therefore, many of them also died in the war. About half from disease, half as many from disease as from wounds and so on. Now, the other thing that happened was the railroads. Bolton never really got a railroad. They got a couple of them that just hit the corners of the town. But Berlin did get 2 railroads. We got one coming from the south to the north, from Framingham to Leominster and Fitchburg. And then we got the Mass Central Railroad, which of course came through Hudson and on through Berlin and on to Northampton in the 1880s. The earlier one came through in 1860s. And the railroads did make a difference for us. We developed more than Bolton, and for quite a few years, quite a long time, we had a bigger population than the town of Bolton, even though Bolton had more land. And from the late 19th century up through about the middle of the 20th century, Berlin actually had a bigger population than Bolton. But then we had other things happen. What's the biggest thing that happened in this area? Highways. And has made all the difference in the world. It produced a lot of growth. I mean, I went to high school in Hudson in the 1960s. And it was after that, after the highways got open, 495 got open, that Hudson had a big growth and went from about 8,000 people to 18,000 roughly in about 20 years. Bolton also got a big spike in that time. And Bolton these days is up over 5,000 people. Berlin finally got to 3,000 people in 2017. Berlin has not grown as fast, and most of that is due to restrictive zoning. We've been very careful to zone the town so that it maintains some kind of a rural flavor. And we've always defended farming in the town. That was one of the basic things. They tried to put in zoning in Berlin that had residential only in it, and the town wouldn't vote it. The most restrictive zoning in Berlin is residential agricultural. Agriculture is written right into it. And that's been the case ever since we got zoning, and that was what had to be done in order to get the people to adopt the zoning back in 1958. But the fact that they did that, and the fact that they have been very restrictive, both Berlin and Bolton are towns without a water system or a sewer system. Berlin has been very careful about the Board of Health regulations and that kind of thing. And that too has kept us from developing as fast as some of our neighbors. One of your problems in Hudson, you've got a sewer system, at least in parts of the town, and you have the water system, and the result is that the developers could really go to town on you. And that's part of what happens as part of these things with these highways. The big highways really make a big change in the way things are. Berlin had the experience, of course, with Marlboro of Solomon Pond Mall, which is about 45% in Berlin and 55% in Marlboro. And so we started getting the tax money out of that, which enabled us to build a new school, a new town office building, a new fire and police. And then a few years later, we finally got the highway department into decent quarters. And the town spent the money on those things rather than hiring more employees right at the beginning and building up the regular budget. Use some of that surplus revenue to start with to do long-term investments in the community, which has helped us to keep the taxes fairly level over the years. That's kind of running out now. The other thing that happened was with Solomon Pond Mall, we got a $3 million to buy conservation land. And when they were negotiating that, the guys from the mall said, we don't do things like that. People don't do things like that with mitigation. And he said, listen, we're a country town. We want to be a country town. You're trying to develop our country town. So what we want from you is some money that we can use to keep the rest of the town more country. And we did. And we got $1.5 million at the time the thing started, and the rest of it we've got $50,000 a year until, I don't know, last year or this year is the last year. In addition to that, we got some more for the same purpose out of Highland Commons, along with lots of other things. When we got our deal on Highland Commons, Hudson called Highland Commons back in and said, wait a minute, we made a deal, but that's not, if you're going to give them that, we want more here. And Hudson got some more out of it too. And when we got done with that whole deal, the developers went to the legislature and got them to restrict what the towns could get for benefits. So both Berlin and Hudson got things out of that others won't get in the future, because the developers got the legislature to make some changes in their favor after they saw what we'd managed to pull off. The good news is, for Hudson, Highland Commons is going great. Solomon Pond Mall is getting very tired. And I fully anticipate we're going to see some major redevelopment of it in the next decade, maybe even sooner. Both Macy's and Penny's are in trouble nationally. And Sears is already gone. They won't sell their property cheap, but they're already gone out of the mall. And so Berlin is going to wrestle with that one. Berlin and Marlboro are both wrestling with that as to how that may be redeveloped. That's a lot of stuff about the town and how it's gotten to be and how it's being in the present. I brought along a couple of things. First, I want to read to you a little bit out of this scrapbook. This is a scrapbook that was kept in the 19th century. We think much of it by Mrs. Dr. Hudson. Dr. Hudson was a medical doctor who had a medical practice in Berlin, but he also started making patent medicines and selling them. You know the wagons that go from town to town and selling the wondrous medicine that would fix everything that you could imagine? Well, he was one of the people that did that. And he built a business of it, starting in Berlin in the 1850s. And it built up, and it built up, and in time, they finally moved the business to the factory to Somerville, and the offices and the store to Boston. And Dr. Hudson he and his wife ended up living in Somerville in their later years, and they came to Berlin in the summer, but they no longer lived there. Mrs. Dr. Hudson was a Berlin girl, and he came to Berlin to practice medicine and found her, among other things. And they lived a good life. They did well. And he made some money doing the patent medicines. But he also was Mr. Entrepreneur in the town of Berlin. He was pushing this and pushing that. And when I started doing deed work and stuff, he bought that one and did something with it for this business and so on. He just shows up in lots of places in the dealing in land. And he also was one of the prime movers in creating the big shoe shop that I mentioned earlier. And he was the chairman of the committee that built the new town hall in 1870 in Berlin. And one of the things about that was people didn't want to spend all that money and so on, and he finally got them to pass it on a limited budget, and by cracky they managed to do it for that price. When we tried to put it on the State Register of Historic Places years ago, and they started looking, well, you say it's Italianate, there's no brackets under the roof, that's one of the things you always have. It never had brackets. They didn't want to believe us. They were sure they must have been taken off at some point, but we produced the photographs to prove it. And the point was they didn't have money enough to bother with the icky-dicky things, so they just didn't put them on there. But the style of it and the shape of the windows in the front and so forth put it in the Italianate period, which of course, you know, what, 5 or 6 years later, Hudson built the magnificent big brick town hall in a similar fashion. At any rate, one of the things that came up is about the creation of the town of Hudson in 1866. And it's true that there was a plan when they were laying it out for the town of Hudson to include land from Bolton and Berlin, as well as from Marlborough and maybe a little bit from Stowe. But both Bolton and Berlin sent somebody down to the legislative committee in Boston to talk about it. And in 1866, they didn't get either one of those. They got the Marlborough land and the Stowe land, but not the other two. 2 years later, the people in that section of Bolton pressed some more at it, and they were finally successful in getting the Bolton section added to Hudson. And I mean, the Grove School, which is on the hill at the corner of Packard Street and Lincoln Street, two-story building, was built as a two-story schoolhouse for the town of Bolton. And when Hudson took over that section of land, that Grove School went with it. And that was part of the deal that had to be made between the two towns on it. And then that building was used for many other things over its life. When I was young, there was a time that it was the Seventh-day Adventist Church in Hudson. But that was a section of Hudson, of Bolton, that was built up with a lot of people living there that were really gravitated toward Feltonville. And it finally was taken over. The section from Berlin never came. Do you remember Pac-Man?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The little ball with the big mouth?
Yeah.
Well, if you look at a map of Hudson, on the west end of Hudson is the big mouth.
Mm.
And in that big mouth is the corner of Berlin. And at the time that they did this, they wanted to get a section of Berlin to fill that in and make the map come out white and so forth. I want to read a little bit, if I might, from Dr. Hudson, who went to the legislature on behalf of Berlin. And there were many different things about it. And now, Mr. Chairman, the statement is this. 2 men with full weight as owners of the soil but desiring to sell their farms, and who will sell perhaps before an act of annexation can be passed. These men, backed by 6 tenants, ask you to give up to Hudson from Berlin a valuation of $23,000. What for? Not for the interest and convenience of the tenants, for they very likely next year will live elsewhere, but for their own interest or convenience, for they propose to sell their farms and move off as soon as possible. But for Hudson, there are tools in the hands of able men who wish with their help to make a good-looking town and also make a school district where there is none and will be none. Lest I be burdensome with Berlin's grief, I will call your attention to one point more and close. The petitioners, as shown, do not live contiguous to Hudson, but in central and west parts of the territory petitioned for. Did they live on the line and ask to have their own farms alone set off? If that were the case, there would be no problem. But it is urged that the non-resident property of this district is owned by Feltonville men. Grant, if you please, that every cent's worth is owned by them, though it would not be true. What then? As outskirt residents of Marlborough, they bought outskirt lands in Berlin as such. They bought those lands because they were cheap. They held them because it was a good investment. They can now sell them for a good price. And is the fact that they choose to hold these lands a reason for the division of this town? If this is be a sound argument, then if real estate were low in Berlin, these same parties might invest all the way to the center and then ask you to annex the whole half of our town. At any rate, he made his case, and the Committee on Towns did not agree to have the section of Berlin go into Hudson. So Hudson ends up still being Pac-Man on its western border. This book is a wonderful wealth of stuff. My grandmother had it and preserved it for many, many years, and it's still in our house. It needs to go to the historical collection, but every time I go to do it, I start reading it and decide I'll keep reading some more before I take it there. There's a lot of good stuff there. Now, I brought with me some pictures of Berlin to share with you. I've given you some ideas about Berlin and its desire to be a country town, and these pictures express that. This was a program I put together a while back. Berlin in season, 4 seasons to the year, some pictures from Berlin, and I'll have some other things about that I include in what I do. This is a picture of the meeting house in Berlin Center, and with both Christmas decorations and snow in the winter. And we start with winter. This is a large house that used to be in the town. It was a big farmhouse, which was later taken over by the state and used for the Lyman School. They had the Berlin cottage of the Westboro Lyman School, and they sent the younger children over to Berlin, the younger boys over here. A couple, name isn't coming up to me right now. The man was the principal, and his wife was the teacher for the kids, and then they had at least 1 or 2 other staff people, and they ran Ira and Sarah Dudley, and they ran the Lyman School in that house for many years. Later, it was owned by John P. McGrail, who was Commissioner of Education in the state in later years. The house was actually torn down about 20 years ago now, but the land, the 107 acres of land that went with it, was acquired 2 years ago by the town for conservation. So we've got another big chunk of land, and that abuts to all the land that goes up over Mount Pisgah to Northborough. So it's another example of how we try to keep the town rural. This is the pile of snow that gets built up every single winter. When there's a lot of snow, it gets piled up there. Usually they truck it out of there pretty fast, but when they first cleared the streets, we ended up that huge pile of snow on the common next to the meeting house. This is a picture of one of the houses in the village. This particular house burned down, well, not down, it burned badly on Memorial Day of 1996 and was replaced by a new house of the same size and footprint. Most people don't notice the difference. But look at the snow piled up. I think this was in 1969. And here's one of the store building in the center. Now the store building was built on the corner of Pleasant Street where the bank is now. The old Victorian house that is now the bank. And in 1852, that was built in 1812. In 1852, it was moved to its present location in order that the big house could be built on the other side. And that has had the store in it its whole life, since 1812. And it is recently, after a couple of owners have started to make it less and less a local store, the present owner is a kid that grew up in Berlin, who worked for the Marriott hotel chain all over the world. And he retired from that and come home and bought the store so he can work 7 days a week here. Workaholic. I had him in the 6th grade. This picture is in South Berlin, and in the background is the top of Mount Pisgah in Northborough. At the far end of the field is a windmill which pumps water. And that was about the last of those windmills in town. There were a lot of people that had them at one time to pump the water from their wells and then get it to the houses of their other buildings. This one was, in, as I say, in South Berlin, and this picture was taken about 1955 or 56. This is a scene on Gates Pond Road. It's a Murphy house on the right. There are now a series of other houses plumped in the fields on either side of that. But the road is still there and looks pretty similar except for the houses. This is an ice storm, one of the trees in the center. These trees have bitten the dust. The diseases on the maples have gotten to them, and they were cut down several years ago. But this is a glorious morning with ice all over the trees and the sun shining off it. This picture is one that was taken in the blizzard of '78, one of the houses on South Street, number 95 South Street. A little Gothic revival house. You can see the gingerbread on the edges of the roof, much like what you see down in Lake Boone on a few of the remaining old houses down there. And this was also the blizzard of '78. You know, they stopped everybody from driving and all that. Well, in Berlin, people drove in Berlin. They didn't go out of town, but they drove around Berlin. It was fine. As long as everybody else stayed out, we got by with it. Yeah, it was really plugged up with snow in '78. Now, in the spring, one of the things you do is go fishing. And we have a fishing derby every spring, April. It used to be the first day of fishing season, but now fishing season doesn't ever end, so it's a little different. But we still have the fishing derby. They stock the little pond, and the kids all come and fish. And kids can go and fish there anytime, but people other than kids aren't allowed to. Find somebody other than kids there, forget it. This is on South Street. It's a little pond on South Street. It actually isn't a terribly deep pond. Out in the middle of it, it's just about as deep as I am tall. It actually was made by running a bulldozer through and just hollowing out the land because the water table's high enough to make the pond. This is the burying ground in the center of Berlin. It was given to the residents of the southerly part of Bolton in 1768. I was at the town offices one day last year, and they said, well, we were looking up all the town lands, and we can't find the deed for the cemetery in the center. I said, well, I can. I went in my papers, I gave them the book and page for it. I said, your problem is Berlin wasn't Berlin then. It was still the south part of Bolton, so you won't find it in an index with the name Berlin on it. Daffodils with a little snow in the spring. One of our guys went to UMass in 1959, and after winter carnival, he'd come home for vacation and for Easter vacation, and while the ladies were inside making hot cross buns, the kids were making a snowman on the front lawn of the meeting house. That thing is about 9 feet high. This is the Methodist Church building. It was built in 1887 on the site where the big shoe shop used to be. And it was, the Methodists used it until about 1940, and then it was sold to Guy Sawyer, who used it for his auction business. And in recent years, in the last 15 years, it has become 19 Carter and is a community center. Lots of things to do there, lots of events, especially music and art. it's really been a great thing for the community. Now, this picture was taken in May. When we changed our town meetings and our elections from April to May, one of the things we thought we'd do is we'd get away from any possibility of winter. This is taken May 9th, and it was the day of the town election. And those are lilacs out in full bloom.
Oh, gosh. What year was that? What year?
1977.
Oh.
And this is taken the same time, and you can begin to see a little bit of purple under the snow on the left-hand edge there. These are in my yard at home. And there's lilacs looking more like what they should look like in the spring.
That's a nice picture.
This is the Chedco Farm Orchards in Berlin, all out in bloom. The apple blossoms don't last too long, but Carl and Viola Phipps, who Carl, of course, was the orchardist at Chedco for 50 years, they referred to it as White Sunday. The Sunday that came while the blossoms were out, they called White Sunday because lots of people were driving by to see all the apple trees and blossoms. And there's a close-up of some of the apple blossoms.
Oh, that's nice.
This is an empty field. They're just starting construction for our Northbrook Village, the housing for elderly folks that we built back around 1980. And this is just as it was starting out. A few more pictures away, we'll see it as it looked later. And this is the house at 127 Central Street with a field of dandelions in spring. A flowering tree in the center. The house was built in 1844 for Reverend Henry Adams, who was then the minister of the meeting at the First Parish. But in later years, the house was owned by various families in the 20th century by the Coldwells. And the whole Coldwells lumberyard is out in the backyard. This house was built on West Street back in the 1920s. And one of the other things that happened that really changed the town for all of our towns around here was Suasco, Sudbury, Assabet, Concord River flood control projects. And one of the flood control projects in Berlin is a big dam off Linden Street, which will back the water all the way up to West Street. And this house was on the land that the state took and was moved along West Street to number 39, closer to the center village, and is still in use today. But this is on the truck after they put it on the truck to move it back in the 1970s. And then this is Northbrook Village as it was built up. We had the empty field before, and this is after they built 40 apartments there. And since then, they built another building out back with 40 more apartments in it. This is the Berlin Memorial School of 1950. Now, while this school was in contemplation, Berlin had only one-room schools. And while they made some effort in grouping the grades together, they were still using the old one-room schoolhouses around the town. And they wanted to build a new school with everything consolidated in one place. Well, they'd only been proposing it for 25 years. And finally, in 1950, they got one built, and this was it. Now, when they were holding the town meeting, one of the town meetings toward doing this, one of the people that was working hard for it was Frances Rice. Frances Rice was a Berlin girl who became a teacher in the Hudson High School and ultimately principal of Hudson High School in the 1930s and 40s. Before she retired, she was the principal at Hudson High School. She was a little bit of a lady, but she was a powerful personality. And she was on the committee that was trying to build the school. Well, she got up in town meeting and spoke about it and advocated it. And of course, she was quite influential. Most of these people had gone to her in high school as their teacher. And she sat down, and the next person got up to speak and made some comment about what Mrs. Rice had said. And somebody corrected him and said, "That's Miss Rice." To which he said, "Oh, I'm sorry, Miss Rice." To which she said, loud enough, you know, the stage whisper, "Not half so sorry as I am." Maybe if we'd had a consolidated school, I wouldn't be. When this school opened, I was in that classroom closest to us in the first grade. This is the powder house, built in 1814. Now in 1812, the state passed a law that said you had to have a safe powder house for your gunpowder for the militia. Bolton built one in 1812, Harvard built one in 1812, all kinds of people did. Berlin, it took 2 more years for them to fight off the unfunded state mandate. In the summertime, you will remember when they used to be doing all kinds of road work, and the local road guys, they'd spread oil and sand and roll it and so forth. Well, this roller was the first big piece of highway equipment the town of Berlin ever bought in 1930. And I took this picture a good 40 years later, in the 70s and perhaps even the 80s. One of the few times it was out late in its life. Recently, they took down the barn that had been stored in, and right now it's up at the highway, the new highway building outside with covers over it, and they still hope to fix it up and have it as part of their display of old road equipment up there. Buffalo Springfield, it was always gasoline. It was not a steamroller.
Wow.
It was gasoline. This was the barn at 218 Linden Street, something of a model farm back in the 1890s. By the time I took this picture, it was in tough shape and was about to be torn down. But we had 3 levels. There was the barn cellar level, which was the depository for what the animals did away with. Then the next level above that was the animal floor. There was a place for horses and a place for cattle and a place for chickens and a place for sheep and so on. And then above that was an 18th century barn frame on top of that whole thing that was the hayfield, the hay mow. And we were able, through the demolition delay bylaw, to get the 18th century barn frame saved so that they could reuse it someday to build something new. So that frame was taken apart, and the rest of the place went. Of course, there were many additions to the barn, but it was quite a thing. This is a house off Sawyer Hill Road. You can tell it's a summer picture. The trumpet vine is out in bright flower. The house was not visible from the road. It kind of hid around back behind a ledge in a hill so that you couldn't see it very well from Sawyer Hill Road. Shortly after this picture was taken, the house was torn down and new houses built. That's now the area where Estabrook Road is, off of Sawyer Hill Road. This is the big barn at the Tyler Farm near the Rotary in South Berlin. It's currently owned by the Stevens family in Marlboro and supposedly going to be part of their museum thing for old cars and stuff. It was a late 19th century barn. The wing on the left-hand side was built in the 20th century for the cows with a modern milking parlor and so forth at that later time. It's still extant, and they've spent some money on it. They've fixed it up a lot, so I think it'll stay a while more. Late summer, goldenrod and ragweed. Hay fever, people, look out. This is mountain ash. mountain ash tree. They're an ornamental tree, but they're really wonderful when they get out with their red berries in the fall, late summer to fall. And then we have a lot of fall. This again is those big trees in the center on the common, the big sugar maples that were there for so long, but are no longer with us. We used to have brighter colors than we do now. These pictures were taken in the 70s, about 50 years ago. And we used to have brighter colors just like New Hampshire. I think it's the dirty air from the highways that's changed it, because we get some color now, but not what we used to get around here. These trees are on West Street. St. Joseph's Church is on the right. Berlin. Lots and lots of places where you could see colored leaves in the old days. This one, that's the building on the right is the apple storage at Cotting's Chedco Farm. And this was taken again in the mid-50s in South Berlin Village. Not only do you have the bright colors of the trees, but at just to the left of the trees is a little summer house. Remember the summer houses? There used to be a lot of those around that people had, so they could sit in the shade with the breezes blowing through and be a little bit cooler in hot summer. That's that same summer house on a different year. There's another arbor of trees, lots of bright colored leaves. This is right opposite the present post office, new post office in South Berlin. That's 255 Pleasant Street. It used to be the old Maynard farm. And this is the double tenement house at 240 Pleasant Street. Again, lots of color in the trees. And more color. The old house at the right was 155 Pleasant Street, which has since bitten the dust, unfortunately. It's a really good old 1780 house, but it needed a lot of work, and the new owners wanted a new one, so they did save some timber out of it and use it in the new house, but that's it. This old house is still there. This is 79 Jones Road. And it's an interesting house, and it has something to do with Berlin history, because it was built as a salt box house in the 1790s, 1780s and 90s. And then it was, in 1841, it was raised up to a full two-story, both front and back. And when they did that, they redid the outside with plaster. We had a number of houses that were made with a plaster on the outside in that period, in the 1830s and 40s. And this is one of them. This house, in my time, they took the plaster off of three sides of it. But the left-hand edge, which shows as white in this picture, is still plaster today and painted white. That side, the plaster had not deteriorated as much, and it still survives. There's two houses left in Berlin that still have exposed outside plaster walls that were made by various people, but Luther Carter, who did a lot of house building in Berlin in the 1830s and 40s and 50s, was supposed to have been the originator of putting plaster on the outside of houses. And this is a couple of the houses, one of the houses that still has it. A couple of houses on the common. The one on the left is another one that's got the Gothic curlicue trim. And of course the leaves are out in the fall. Needless to say, there's a lot of more pictures of fall because it's more spectacular. This is A.A. Bartlett's house in the center of Berlin from 1859. It's a good-sized house, and it's got some really big rooms in it, quite regal. At that time, Jack Lindsay lived there, and he had pumpkins out there and was selling pumpkins and giving away to some of the kids, too. This is that same pond that we saw the kids fishing in, taken from a distant angle. At this point in time, things look a lot different there because we've got a brand new school on the right-hand edge of this picture. But this was great for its reflections and so forth. Quite a few years ago that I took that. And this is in West Berlin, at the corner of Allen Road on the right and West Street on the extreme left, going in toward Clinton. It's very close to the Clinton line. And again, the leaves are going by, but there's still some color there. This is on Lancaster Road. The land there has since been built up to houses, but at that time it was still owned by one of the farmers who had cattle. And in the summertime, he'd take his young stock that wasn't yet milking, and he'd put them out to pasture in this field for the summer. And they'd eat all summer and build themselves up and get heavier. And by the time it was over, they might be ready to be bred and start to be milkers. But this is fall before they were brought in for the winter. As I say, now it's all built up to houses in that area. The little pond's still there, but it's hard to find. And then this is on the plain, the area we now call South Commons, near where the new school is. And it's taken looking up toward the meeting house. Corn stalks, all dried up, but not yet come off. And here are some gathered together into clusters in the field up on Linden Street near Barnes Hill Road. We like to think we live in the country. This is a view across the fields near Route 290. The Tyler place is at the right with the brick house and the red barn. And on the left, the white buildings are the Reese family before they sold it off. They had all kinds of businesses, from concrete blocks to, of course, they were still raising cattle for a long time. You can see the hay bales in the field. They were still farming it at that time, but it is now, this area is now a hotel, apartment houses, and such. And here's the old Methodist church in Berlin when Guy Sawyer was still doing auctions. They were selling stuff on a Saturday morning about 1971 when I took this picture. On Central Street, coming back toward Hudson from the center of Berlin, this is number 79 Central Street. It was built as a Greek Revival house by one of the carpenters in the town, and after only a few years he sold it because he was doing business in Worcester, and he was trying to make money that way, and he didn't stay in one place too long because he was trying to be an entrepreneur, and he had some success at it. In the background on the left, you can see the cupola on the barn at 96 Central Street. Big barn built in 1880. And then we're back to winter and the end of the program. Thank you very much.
Thank you.